Okay, welcome to another ground lesson on the circuit, exercise 17 in the flight training manual. This one will focus on the non-standard circuit and non-standard procedures. So just as a refresher, a standard circuit is left-hand and it's flown in a rectangular shape at approximately 1,000 feet above the aerodrome. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about the way they talk about controlled airport procedures in the A versus what an airport states in the CFS, just to show you how different each airport can be if it has its own procedures. As always, you want to get the ATIS prior to contacting a control tower. And then it says, when practical, it's recommended the pilot make initial contact 5 minutes prior to requesting a clearance. Now, if you try to do that in Langley, you're going to be much, much too far away. They actually want you to call them 5 miles from the airport, which is much closer, at 1,500 feet ASL or above. If an airport that you're going to has a published VFR terminal procedure, then knowing what those procedures are is really important before you go to that airport because it can really help you plan your arrival. Prior to contacting the tower, you will have got the ATIS, which will tell you what runway is in use and help you plan what you would expect to get cleared for. Then you'd contact the controller and expect a clearance. Yes, they could deny you, but most likely they'll clear you inbound via the shortest routing to the runway, as they can do depending on traffic. Now, while they could clear you straight to the circuit, they could also, if there's a published terminal procedure, clear you inbound via a published route. It would sound like your call sign, fly the Arnold arrival for runway 01, at which point you would be expected to fly that exact arrival. And if you didn't, it would really confuse the controller and probably get you in trouble. So if you're not familiar with the procedure, right, if you're unfamiliar or if you didn't look it up, let the controller know. Say, I'm unfamiliar, and they will guide you in. They're not crazy about that option because it means they really got to keep your eye on you, but it's better to let them know and be safe. However, if it works, the controller will just clear you directly to the circuit as we discussed earlier. One thing to note is that where an airport circuit might be published one way, the tower can clear you to whichever works best for them. As an example, let's say this circuit is a left-hand circuit as published for this runway. If there is already traffic in that circuit, depending on your position, the tower might clear you in via the opposite downwind, where you would join the opposite downwind and base and then a regular final for this runway. This happens all the time in Langley and can catch pilots off guard if they're not ready for it. Now that we've talked about circuit arrival procedures, let's talk about the circuits themselves. And although I've spoken at length about Langley since I fly out of here, it is a really good example because not only do you have the noise abatement, but you've also got this kind of modified crosswind around this noise sensitive area, followed by a pretty, like as tight as you can make it, downwind. So it's a really interesting one, but let's look at some others. These are 2 more local examples. On the left, you've got Pitt Meadows, which has their circuits kind of outside of the noise sensitive areas wherever possible. And on the right, you've got Squamish, which has got this very offset approach for runway 33 around the noise sensitive area, as well as a very specific departure off 15, which is similar to Langley. It's a right-hand turn right after departure to avoid the noise sensitive area. Now let's talk about modified circuit altitudes from the standard, which would be 1,000 foot above the aerodrome elevation. Some airports have a modified night circuit where the circuit is higher than it would be during the daytime. But another example I'm going to show you right now is Boundary Bay. Now I could probably do an entire video on Boundary Bay. Don't go there unless you really know the procedures well. But it specifically has a circuit that is done at 800 feet AGL with all the turns being done above 400 feet. So it makes it interesting. You also have right-hand circuits for runway 25 and 31. And another thing that's interesting is that in this, in the procedures for this airport, it refers you also to the Terminal Class C procedures for Vancouver International if you wanted to go westbound across the Strait of Georgia. The last thing I want to talk about, which makes this circuit very interesting, is that even though it's at 800 feet, if you find yourself on an extended downwind for 25, well, if you take it too far, now you've actually left the control zone and entered Delta Air Park's control zone, which sits right next to it. So just be cautious about where you're flying and what altitude. So in case I didn't really get my point across, it's really important to research your aerodrome just to make sure that you know what you're doing and don't assume it's a standard circuit. As I've noticed, many aerodromes around this area are not.